The plaiting is to essentially create tension in your dough. Then your bread will spring up in the oven at the end and really come up nice and plump.
If only Britain's economy had as much bounce to it as one of Sophia's loaves. The baker has gone from bread making in her kitchen to sourdough start-up on a North London high street. Right in the midst of the UK's worst economic contraction for 300 years.
You can't be risk averse right now because it is a risk full stop. There is no choice but to go ahead and do. And so you may as well put all your effort and all your money into it and make it flourish. So you sort of treat it as a much bigger project than it may have been if it hadn't been a pandemic.
She wasn't impressed with state assistance helping new businesses rise and wants the UK's Chancellor to prove he can do better. But Rishi Sunak's priority this past year hasn't been creating new jobs. It's been protecting millions of existing ones while COVID has locked down much of the economy. And in his 2021 budget, he's announced the government will carry on paying the wages of furloughed workers until September.
They will continue to receive 80% of their salary for hours not worked until the scheme ends. As businesses reopen, we will ask them to contribute alongside the taxpayer to the cost of paying their employees.
The government has already pumped $390 billion of pandemic spending into the economy. Public debt is close to 100% of national income for the first time since the early 60s. Sunak has to continue this largesse whilst also giving some sort of indication of how eventually it's going to be paid back.
In 2023, the rate of corporation tax paid on company profits will increase to 25%. Even after this change, the United Kingdom will still have the lowest corporation tax rate in the G7.
The Chancellor is attempting the difficult task of appearing both generous and economically responsible. He's also fighting on two fronts. It's not just COVID, there are the difficulties of Brexit too. Many import-export reliant companies are having big problems with that. Add into this mix the urge not to let a good crisis go to waste. There's opportunity for a wholesale restructuring of the economy should the government choose to take it.
And the problem we've had with the pandemic is all of the government support to business has been about supporting business as it was and as it is, rather than as it should be. So what needs to happen as we're moving from the pandemic into that process of recovery, government support to business needs to be more about nudging alterations in behaviour towards a new form of economy, which would be a decarbonised economy.
Rishi Sunak did say green bonds would be issued this summer for environmentally friendly projects, and there'll be infrastructure funding to level up the UK's regions, sharing investment and affluence beyond the sourdough-hungry middle classes of London. This is a long game, though, and the proof, Sophia might say, will be in the pudding. Rory, Challands, Al Jazeera, London.
Well, let's speak to Duncan Weldon about this. He's the Britain economics correspondent at The Economist and is via Skype from London. Thank you very much for being with us. So, first of all, what did you think was the headline news from this budget that was presented today?
Hello. I think actually the headline news was the really big giveaway from the Chancellor this year and next year. So in the lead up to this budget, the talk has all been about the Chancellor levelling with the British people, talking about hard choices to make, talking about big tax rises. But what we actually got today was a big continuation of support to see the economy through into recovery this year and next.
But isn't it a bit too early to be trying to recover the economy while the pandemic is still raging?
Yes, I think that's completely fair. And, you know, what Britain has set out now in its, we're calling our coronavirus roadmap is we've had very fast progress, faster than many people expected on vaccinating the public. But the lifting of restrictions, the ending of social distancing is going to be very slow. It's not going to be until the end of June before many of those restrictions are gone. And what we saw in the budget today was economic support being recalibrated, sort of keep people going until we get that reopening.
There's a lot of talk about the pandemic, of course, but there's also Brexit. Are we able to say what will have a bigger impact on the UK economy? Is it Brexit or is it the pandemic?
That's a very good question. I mean, Brexit, I'm afraid it's still too early to say quite how lasting the damage will be. in the documents from the government's forecasters today, the official forecasters, they reiterated their view that although Britain now has a free trade deal with the European Union, it will mean more friction in trade, less exports to Europe. It will be harder to import stuff from the European Union. And over the course of 10 or 15 years, that's something like a 3 or 4 percentage point hit to the economy. Now, interestingly, the government's forecasters said today they currently think the long-term hit to the economy from this pandemic will be about 3% of GDP. So actually in the same sort of order of magnitude.
Right. The Chancellor has had high popularity ratings in the polls over the past year, but the leader of the opposition in Britain, Keir Starmer, did not hold back in his criticism of Sunak's economic decisions throughout the first year of this pandemic. Do you think that's fair criticism, or is just party politics?
I mean, there's always a bit of party politics around the budget, but many of the criticisms that the Labour Party levelled at Rishi Sunak about his handling of the economy last year are in many ways fair. If we look back at the summer and the autumn, Rishi Sunak was one member of the government's cabinet who was arguing to reopen the economy last summer. They were saying the priority has to be protecting the economy. But what we've learned is this supposed trade-off between the economy and health is in many ways a false trade-off. We reopened our economy too soon. The virus spread again. We had to close down the economy hard and did a lot of economic damage. But thankfully, the government seemed to have learned from that experience because, as I was saying, the path to reopening this time around is much more cautious.
Thank you for talking to us about this. Thank you for your insight. Duncan Welton from The Economist joining us there from London.